Greetings. My name's Guy Dauncey, and this is the show Change the World, where I like to invite guests on the show who share my passion for big, positive visions of the future, solutions, practical stuff that makes us feel good instead of the endless doom and gloom. We have enough of that. My guest today is Delores Broten, who's come down from the Comox Valley, who edits the magazine, the Watershed Sentinel, which you've been doing for 27 years. It's a bi-monthly environmental news magazine. The voice of the grassroots, the folks who are working on the environmental issues that face us today, oil and gas pipeline projects, water, climate change, genetically modified organisms, fish farming, conservation efforts, and solutions, I should say. The Watershed Sentinel provides a forum for intelligent discussion about environmental issues and their broader social implications. And in the past, you've also founded Reach for Unbleached as a campaign to stop pulp mill pollution.
Right.
And frankly, you've worked on a whole whack of issues, and now you're a publisher as well.
Yes.
So at the big end, what does it feel like knowing that you've been publishing this magazine for 27 years?
Well, a lot of the time, it was only a hobby. It was sort of on the side of my desk while I was doing Reach for Unbleached and all that other environmental campaigning. I wasn't really working full-time on the magazine.
Right.
So it was really about, 10 years ago, I decided to work full-time on the magazine. And it really showed that I was able to give it more attention, I think. It's grown up a lot in that time.
Well, it's got lovely design now. It's throughout the magazine. I've got design pages. It's thicker.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stories in this, and the stories are getting they're pretty professionally well researched.
We try. We try. We really try to live up to all journalistic standards. Even though we have our own viewpoint and our own values, you can still be a good journalist. And I'm really serious about this because the Financial Post has its own viewpoint.
Yeah.
So why can't we?
So how would you describe the essence of good journalism?
Factual. When you're taking a viewpoint because of your values, you tell people.
Right.
You just have to, I don't actually believe in objective journalism because the world is too big.
Yes.
And we all see it from our own eyes and our own values. But if you tell people where you're coming from, and then you say, these are the facts that I have discovered, that's honest journalism.
Right. And so as an honest interview host today, I need to say that I have donated to the magazine, I've written for it, I've supported it for years, so I'm not exactly impartial.
Right. Well, we have actually worked together quite a lot.
Yes, yes. This is the current issue on the sharing economy.
Yeah.
This is probably the most fresh in your mind.
Yes, it is.
Where do people find this, first of all?
Online.
Yes.
Some Chapters bookstores carry it.
Yeah.
We give away some free copies at the Vancouver Island libraries.
Okay.
Victoria Public Library, we have our very own magazine box.
Right.
But mostly you can get it by subscribing.
Right. And the website is simply watershedsentinel.ca. We'll get it up on the screen so people can see that. So in producing this issue, it's 2 months' work gone into this. And it says sharing economy. What excited you most about what you came across during this issue?
Oh boy, what a terrible, actually, that's a really good question.
You've got to have some stories that...
I actually liked the Big Dams story a lot. We had to work very hard on it because it came in, it needed a lot of editing. We sent it back for rewrites. We did a whole bunch of stuff like that. And in the end, it came out being a good story. So that was very satisfying.
Here we are, I'm going to fold it open. Big Dams, the disaster of global hydroelectric development.
I know, Guy, it's not sunny ways, but it's very interesting in terms of how drought follows dams around the world.
Okay, explain that.
Oh, I'm not going to explain. The reason we sent it back for rewrites is because we don't know that that's a cause and effect. It's simply an association. You build big dams, you displace people, you change land use patterns.
Right.
And then subsequently you have droughts and your dam is useless. Or
But there's no known connection. There's an association for some reason.
There's another article coming down the pipe.
Okay.
Where we may be able to talk about those connections, but because we're science-based, I'm not going to go there.
That's fair enough.
You know.
You also cover a lot of First Nations issues.
Very much so.
So the cover of this one has got a, fully First Nations, right?
That is actually my favorite issue in a long, long time.
Really? Right.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, we wanted to do an issue about reconciliation, about First Nations, about supporting First Nations land use planning, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And for a long time I thought, well, we should find a First Nations person to edit it. But in the end we didn't, because we wanted a bunch of different First Nations voices. And First Nations are all very rooted in their own particular nations and cultures.
Yes.
And I think we did a good job of only having Indigenous voices from all over the country.
Interesting.
So
one of your stories here is Canada 150,
right.
our home on native land. And obviously a lot of people made the point that what are we doing celebrating 150 years when it should be like 15,150?
Yeah. And I think Vancouver took that as their slogan, didn't they? 150 plus?
Plus, yes, because it's a lot, it's plus,
right.
Mm-hmm. And this also has a story going into it on, I think, 150 acts.
Right. This is excerpted. There's not actually 150 acts in that article. We had to edit it down, partly because the women who wrote the article, I think they're kind of hoping to do a book or something.
Right.
They said they have other projects.
There's a good title. So it's 150 steps you can take right now towards First Nations reconciliation.
Right, and they're really good. They're things like read First Nations bloggers.
Yeah.
Like, hello, why not?
Yes.
There's a whole solitude or separation that doesn't have to be. And that's part of what we're writing about when we're constantly supporting First Nations, is that we don't need to live in all these silos.
Yeah. When I first came to Canada in 1990, after training in sociology and anthropology, living in Britain all those years, I was astonished at the division between the white community and everyone else.
Yeah.
And the First Nations community. They were like two totally different solitudes. Now, at least in Victoria, there are recognition that here was a village, say on on Willows Beach. That was a village site, and there's signage about that. So we're just beginning to now recognize, and we're just beginning to change the place name. So Mount Douglas, named after the first,
colonizer,
is now being changed to Mount Pecols.
I mean, there is a dream behind this. To me, there's a big dream that we let, we learn to co-govern with the First Nations, do land use planning together, not like just here we want to do a mine, you guys tell us what you think, thank you, goodbye, which is what's going on now. But there is a dream behind it for me where, because the First Nations have always lived here, their attitude to what you do to the land is very different. We, white people, settlers, have moved here, and we can always, cut and move on. Yes. We're plunderers, basically, as a culture.
Well, the other thing that struck me when I first moved out here, after living in Europe all those years, was that there is no wilderness left in Europe. So because you just don't, there's no such thing. The Lake District, which Wordsworth wrote his poetry about, daffodils and things, I come out here and I think, that's a clear cut. That's what happens when you cut all the trees down.
Isn't that what Patrick Moore said? He said, don't think of them as clear cuts, just think of them as new meadows.
And so I realized that, the sense that Europeans coming out, all those trees, cut it all down, right?
Yeah. There's lots, it doesn't matter.
And how dangerous that could be because in Switzerland, Robert Bateman gave a talk once, and he said that as early as 1200 AD, they had a law against clear-cutting on forests, because they know that the soil is going to get lost and they can't preserve the forest.
That's right. The Watershed Sentinel started, before it was the Watershed Sentinel, it started as the Cortes Island Forest newsletter. And so that thing about Switzerland and the selective logging was one of the first things I started publishing about.
So if you drive down the road, say out to Cowichan Lake, and you've got the steep mountains up there, and you know that we're now already approaching the third of the 60-year cuts,
I know.
And every time there's a rainstorm in the winter,
You
the
should see
soil is getting washed away.
You should see the color of the rivers today. They're all brown.
So your title initially was the Watershed Sentinel. The word watershed is
Right.
vanishing.
It's smaller.
But talk about the importance of watershed in all this.
Well,
What is a watershed, for
my
instance?
partner,
Yes.
Don, wrote an intro to the magazine in the beginning, and it was that we all live in a watershed. Everybody lives in watersheds, naturally, because water goes downhill.
Where the water drains to,
That's the
yes.
watershed. And the watershed is also from the top down to the bottom. And then he talked about how in times of yore, I believe he said, we posted sentinels on the hilltops to warn of dangers coming into the valley or the villages. And so we became the Watershed Sentinel. And the
Okay.
watershed is a little less now because we're devoting more energy to the integration between nature and society.
Yes.
More interested in, like in this issue, the cooperative model as a way out of the cut and run society that we've built.
Right. How would the cooperative model of doing things work in a typical Vancouver Island watershed?
Oh, it would be so much fun.
Go for it.
Well, first of all, of course, you have your credit union, which we have an article on the history of credit unions.
Yes.
So you have your credit unions, you have
So your finance was managed cooperatively?
your finance is managed for the benefit of the people in that watershed.
Oh, so a company wants to do some forestry work. They're not getting anonymous, distant finance in our wonderful imaginary world.
They're not
right?
a company coming from somewhere else.
Right, it'd be a
They're
local company.
a local company that's doing work. And as Herb Hammond always said, the real profit in the forest is local jobs.
Right.
And other than that, there's really no point cutting it down.
So you'd have local finance through a credit union.
Local industry, you would have what they used to call remanufacturing plants,
Yes.
where you make goods out of your forest.
Well, value added, we call it these days.
We call it
yes.
yes, exactly.
yeah.
And I actually did an article once on Algonquin Park
Yes.
back in Ontario. And Algonquin Park was started as a park for the logging industry.
Well, that's a new concept.
I know, but the farms were encroaching in on the forest,
Right.
and the logging industry was worried about it.
Yes.
So they lobbied to start Algonquin
Okay.
Park. And so Algonquin Park forever was logged until just
Right.
recently.
Yeah.
I think people have tried to change the rules lately, but large parts of Algonquin Park have always been selection logged.
Yes.
And they had something like 20 foresters and students going out into the forest, marking every tree at the cut line and on the butt, so that you had to only cut those trees. And Algonquin Park was supporting something like 20,000 woodworkers
Oh my
in the
goodness.
area around the park. It was phenomenal. So that's a local economy.
So here on Vancouver Island, we have the Wildwood Forest, just
Right.
south of, in Cedar,
Yeah.
where Merv Wilkinson, I'm sure in the past you've carried stories on Merv Wilkinson.
He was one of our first subscribers.
I think he'd be 110
actually.
years old if he was still around now, but
Yeah.
that people go to it. It's about 140 acres, I believe,
Yeah,
and
it's small.
think of it as a park, but it is being logged according to his ecosystem-based methods of forest management.
Right.
And when I looked into this and met Merv, I discovered that by doing this real ecosystem-based forestry, they got more timber out of the forest than a 60-year cut, and more jobs.
Right. But you see, Merv was staying in one place.
That's the point.
He wasn't cutting and
Yes.
moving on, cut and move on.
That's the big
Right.
difference. And BC's so huge.
And BC's so huge, but whoever said we had to cut all the trees in BC?
Yeah.
Where was that written?
Right.
You know, if you have a local economy for local people, you're exporting very little.
Yes.
And I think that's where we can learn from our First Nations economies, that they did do export and trade, but it was limited.
Right.
It wasn't that they harvested every salmon in the river.
But part of that is surely to do with technology change, because when the First Nations were harvesting, you're going to have to cut a cedar tree down, you're going to have to burn it, and then it's about a week's work for several people.
Yeah, but the fishing was easy.
The fishing was very easy, yes. But to follow my chain of thought, what took a week in the past to one tree, a chainsaw can now do in half an hour.
That's true.
And a fellow buncher can do in 5 seconds almost.
Yeah, but why are we doing it?
Why are we doing it? I would, if I put my orthodox hat on, because the world needs timber to build houses, to make paper, and there's profit to be made from productive activity by workers and provides jobs.
I think the only driving motive there is the profit.
Right.
I don't think that the corporations, the logging corporations, they don't care about the workers.
Right.
If they did, they wouldn't be hiring cheapo contractors all the time. And they're constantly fighting to save their market share.
Right.
So that's just nonsense.
So,
it's profit motive for foreign owners.
Right. So I'm doing a lot of work on redefining the economy and researching the economy at the moment. And one of the core pieces I've come to is it goes right back to our value system. Do we value me more important than we?
Right.
Or we more important than me? If it's just me, then everything is there to serve my needs.
That's right.
My profit, my shares, my whatever.
Yeah, and when you lose, it's your fault.
Yeah. And if we think in terms of we, it's not just our community, but it's our watershed, our future, our children. So you're having a wider framing.
That's right.
And there's a lot of businesses doing successful work.
There's some. We'll see. I just saw today that BlackRock has instructed, or has made a press release today, that all of its investments are to have social benefit.
So
like BlackRock's huge.
BlackRock is a huge global corporation.
Now, what they mean by social benefit and whether it's real remains to be seen. But this is Larry Fink, and it's a big deal.
That's a big deal. I also read recently that Norway's sovereign wealth fund, the royalties, because the royalties from all the oil they have, they think the state takes 90% of the income, but they got $1 trillion in it, and they have voted to exclude all coal investments from that. And are they moving beyond that, I think, further?
I think so,
to exclude other...
Yeah, I think so.
So if you imagine that some of the huge pension funds in the world did the same thing, you can begin to see change happening, right?
It's sort of like benevolent capitalism is still capitalism, and it's still not cooperative.
Okay.
By definition, because under capitalism, somebody owns things and everybody else works for money.
So let me throw another problem to you around this, because there's a bit of social anthropology that says that the biggest group of humans that can really have relationships is 150 people. You can sustain personal relationships and gifts. So if you're doing a corporation with 5,000 workers, and there are benefits of scale from really big companies. I mean, a computer that wasn't on would cost far more. A solar panel production plant that wasn't on a large scale the solar panels will cost twice as much.
Okay.
So the challenge is that how do you have socially responsible production when you can't all be a hands-on cooperative?
Well, 150 is pretty small.
Yes.
150 can lead to some eon-long feuds, if you ask me.
Yes.
I've lived in small towns.
There's a drawback to smallness as well.
Yes.
There can be a drawback, yes.
You certainly can.
So
mind you, it's endlessly entertaining.
So I want to switch the subject, because as well as being a publishing magazine, you've taken to publishing books.
I know. This is just such an exciting development.
So show me the first book you published.
All right. This is Beyond Banksters, Resisting the New Feudalism by Joyce Nelson. Joyce started writing for us a few years ago.
I'll hold it up here so we can get a clear grip on that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And what is Beyond Banksters about?
It's about the trade deals. It's about the need for public banking as opposed to borrowing money from private banks. There's no reason why government can't borrow money from the public bank, which means that any interest we owed would be interest we, the people, owed to ourselves, which would be quite a good deal. I mean, that's why
So that was one short sentence that had a massively big idea in it, right?
Yes.
Because we've grown up in a Canada where there's the credit unions,
right?
But the big 5 banks, they're fully privately owned. And what Joyce is arguing in this is that the state itself, the government, can publicly own a bank.
Well, we do. We own the Bank of Canada.
Right, which is our central bank.
Which is our central bank.
And
our governments could be borrowing money from it. However, there was some nefarious business and an unknown trade deal way back in the 70s that stopped the practice of the Bank of Canada loaning money to governments.
Right. So my understanding, a central bank, which is the Bank of Canada,
Right.
can not only loan money, it can create money. It actually get a chance to print it.
Sure. Well, it does now.
Yes.
I mean, when the other way money's created is through the private banks
Yes.
loaning you money because they don't have the money
Correct.
they loan you. So it's all printing money anyway, actually. Money's just,
Well, what's interesting is
money
that
is a drugs.
in all of the books on economics I'm reading, very few cover how money is created. And,
Yes.
and the economic theorists don't agree with what the bankers say they actually do,
Right. Why not?
because they're in the world of theory.
Oh, yeah.
It's not tied.
Right.
It's
It's
confusing.
all an act of God.
It's very confusing.
Yeah. So anyway,
What's the second book?
After Beyond Banksters, we wound up publishing a book by Rafe Mair. Rafe Mair's, sadly, last book, and it's called Politically Incorrect.
A very appropriate title for Rafe Mair.
Very. And my board didn't like it at all until I told them the subtitle,
Here,
which
let's
is
have a look at this.
How
I'll hold it up
Canada
nice and
Lost
strong,
Its
right.
Way and the Simple Path Home.
Right.
And Rafe goes back, excuse me for a
Yeah.
sec.
So this is How Canada Lost Its Way and the Simple Path Home, with a big red road down the middle and all sorts of black windy ones. Yes.
Rafe goes back through constitutions, the British Constitution, the American Constitution, and ours. He talks about Meech Lake, if you're old enough to remember Meech Lake,
Yes, I am.
and the Charlottetown Accord. We put a little forward in for those who were, what was it, Claire, those who were too young
Yes.
or distracted
Yes.
to remember Meech Lake and Charlottetown, because Rafe goes through a lot there about what's wrong with our Constitution, why in particular it does not serve British Columbia. It's totally unfair to BC, and it's engraved in stone to be unfair to BC forever.
I can't resist asking, why is our Constitution unfair to BC?
Because Quebec is guaranteed 1/4 of the seats forever.
Forever.
Right, no matter what the population
So even
does.
if BC had 50 million people in it, we'd
That's
still,
right. That's right.
unless we reopen the Constitution, which every politician
Right.
goes running to the door.
Exactly, because of Meech and Charlottetown, which
Right.
Mr. Mayor helped torpedo.
So what else did, we got 5 minutes left, by the way, so
Okay.
what else did Rafe cover in this?
The other thing I think is really important, that was really the heart of his message, because this book, Rafe worked on it for 3 months as he was dying.
Yes.
And it was a really important manuscript to him. And one of the things he talks about is that the only way he could think of to fix Parliament without Constitution, without costing any money, is to have MLAs and MPs have a secret vote so that the Prime Minister did not hold all the power. And then your MP could represent you when he had to.
Well, in Britain, they kind of do that. It's called stabbing in the back.
Well, he talks about that. He says, well, in Britain, MPs do occasionally go against the
Yes.
party line,
Yes.
but there's 540 MPs, so they're not all lining up for a cabinet post because it's not
Right.
possible.
Yes.
Whereas in Canada, everybody's lining up for the goodies.
Right.
And so they're behaving like they do what they're told.
So you were sitting down with him one-on-one for quite a long time and putting this together.
Yes. Yes, it was a wonderful experience.
Tell me about Rafe as a person, then.
Rafe was charming and funny, and he was just so much fun to work with.
Wow. Even though he was ill at the time.
He was very ill, but he was just and humble. He kept saying, "I'm just the writer. You're the editor. You edit." Because I was like,
frankly, Rafe was not a humble-seeming person. He's the biggest
not
ego
at
out there.
all. No, but he wanted people to know also that since he had been a social credit cabinet minister, he had changed.
And social credit is pretty far
Right.
right-wing,
Yeah.
yes, right.
And Rafe said, "But I've changed, and people don't realize that." And his
Interesting.
feelings were hurt that
Oh.
people didn't realize
Right.
he'd changed.
So before we wind up, what other thoughts come to mind from your years of doing this and the sort of what's your overall sense of
Okay.
27 years of change represented through your magazine?
And maybe not change, because I
True.
find we write about the same things over and over again. But my big thought, and the one that I really want people to take away, is that this is not a simple process. It's not 5 or 10 year struggle. This is hundreds, maybe thousands of years. I remember once somebody was saying that the project is to turn the Salish Sea into a sustainable ecosystem, and it's probably a 500-year project. And so when we get discouraged because we've lost something or
Yes.
been stabbed in the back by certain dams or whatever,
Yes.
we need to remember that it's only one small battle in a much longer
Right.
journey. And as a woman, I also want to say, I have experienced social change in my own life, because it would have been very hard for you and I to have this conversation 40 years ago because of the sexism. So change is possible, but it's slow.
So you felt the sexism earlier when you were younger?
Oh,
And you
yes.
felt it reduced?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. People look me in the eye now.
So when you started this magazine, well, who's she? Is that kind of thing?
Well, not by then it was already starting to
Yes.
change.
'Cause the environmental
but
community-
in the 60s,
Yes.
it was bad.
Really? Wow.
Really bad. Yeah. Yeah. Lawyers, doctors, forget it.
How many readers do you have for this?
Ooh, hard to say. We print 2,500 copies.
Yeah.
We also have all of our back issues up for free online, and all of our stories,
Yeah.
most of our stories online.
Yeah.
So between it all, it's thousands, and
yeah.
people steal it all the time, which is the point, you know. We
Well,
want to get the word out.
You haven't got a price on the cover.
We're supposed to have.
Well, if you do it, so it's tiny,
oh,
tiny,
yes, it's
tiny.
right there.
So
Yeah, yeah.
it looks, and tell you the truth, so many magazines like this
Are free.
these
I
days.
know.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a challenge that you need to increase.
We're making it though. We are
Maybe-
making it. People are subscribing and they're giving away subscriptions as gifts. And
Yeah.
this was our biggest Christmas season ever.
So if you want to surprise your sisters and brothers and uncles and aunts
Yes.
with a birthday gift,
Right. The Watershed Sentinel. Go to
A-
watershedsentinel.ca.
and give them a subscription and a free copy, in the package, and you'll.
That's right.
And that's big. Well, look, Dolores, this has been. First of all, thank you so much
Oh.
for being a champion of our watersheds and our wider environment, and being a sentinel of hope for us all.
Talk about a sentinel of hope,
for many
Mr.
years.
Dauncey.
This has been fantastic. So,
'Kay.
my name's Guy Dauncey. This has been the show called Change the World, where we have bright conversations like this. One of my little contributions is this novel I've produced called Journey to the Future, which is a visit to Vancouver in the year 2032 with fictional characters, which actually portrays a whole world in which we're living in a much more upbeat, positive, community-oriented, cooperative way. If you like this show and you want to tune in again next week. If you want to be on the show, send us an email to Shore Cable. We'll get my email address, guydauncey@earthfuture.com, put up there. So contact us, tell your friends about it, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching.